forward for a message. All right, no other little ones coming. That's okay, they can listen in. And there's might be one or two on Zoom too. Hey, do you know what today is? I know you two know what today is because it's also Noisy Sunday, because I did forget Noisy Sunday last week. My apologies to all of you who brought your change last week. Totally went through it, forgot it in the bulletin, so we're gonna do it today. But we're not doing that yet. We're gonna do that during the offering time. But today is one of our red days. We have a couple red days. One's Pentecost, one's today. Every once in a while, there's a Saints' Day that we celebrate that's red. But what's today? I'll tell you what, technically it's tomorrow is the day because it's the 31st of October. Oh, Halloween. Katharine, what is it?
But it's Halloween.
It is the eve of All Saints' Day. But you know what else it is?
Go ahead, say it.
My husband calls it Holy Heretic Sunday.
Hi, Holy Heretic.
Hi, Holy Heretic Day. It is Reformation Sunday. Do you know why we celebrate Reformation Sunday? Any ideas?
Because Halloween.
Well, Luther did nail the 95 Theses up the day before All Saints' Day because he knew people would see it then, because they'd be out at the church in Wittenberg on All Saints' Day, so they would definitely see it. And I don't know what day of the week it was in 1517, but still in the Roman Catholic Church, you go on All Saints' Day to do a service. We always celebrate All Saints Sunday, the first Sunday of November instead of November 1st. So in a sense, yes, but we celebrate because Luther had an awful lot to say about reforming the church and making sure that we returned back to our scriptures and that we knew that we were saved by the grace of God alone through our faith, because of the grace of God alone, not because of anything that we did. You can't save yourself. So all these people came and they wanted to get a chance to hear me speak, but you know what? They're not even going to get to listen to me today. Katharine von Bora is going to come back. Okay, Luther's wife.
That's just.
Oh, I don't think they can figure that out.
Yes, I do.
Oh, can they? All right, well, you're right. It's really just me. But Katharine is going to come and share a message with them. So I hope you. She's coming. Not Katharina Scarlet Stahl. Katharine von Bora is coming. Thanks for coming out today, and happy Reformation Day.
Still you.
Still me. Just give me a moment here. In the meantime, if you don't remember all your catechism classes, you at least remember that Reformation Sunday is when we remember the 95 Theses being nailed on the Wittenberg church door. We're just not really sure all the details of that historically, but we do remember. Celebrate it. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be moved and though the mountains be toppled into the depths of the sea, though the waters rage and foam, and though the mountains tremble at its tumult. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our stronghold. Oh, you just interrupted me during my time of prayer. Well, it's not just one time of prayer. You know, having been in the convent all those years, I do still try to keep some of those hours of prayer, not quite as tightly as I did in the convent, of course. There's no bells tolling and the rest of the nuns aren't there, but I do keep quite a few hours of prayer throughout the day. And praying the Psalms is one of the special things that I do often and have done throughout my life. Oh, some of you might not know me. Some of you met me before. I'm Katharine von Bora. You probably know my husband a little bit better than myself, Dr. Martin Luther. And today, as I was reading through that prayer again and praying it one more time, that's from Psalm 46, I realized how many times in my life I returned right to that prayer. Now, there's a lot of Psalms that are my favorite Psalms because, again, if you're praying the Psalms over and over again, you develop a fondness for a lot of different Psalms. But one of the Psalms that I've always loved is Psalm 46, and that reminder that the Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our stronghold. And all those images, even though the earth be moved, God is still with us and holding fast to us. I can tell you a couple times when I really prayed that prayer. In fact, the first one that comes to my mind was a time when I couldn't say the Psalms out loud, but this and quite a few of the other Psalms were going through my head. And that was the eve of Easter. It was April 7th, 1523. And a group of us from the convent had read some of Dr. Luther's works before them. In fact, a few of us had even seen him speak a few times because, we did occasionally get out traveling and we would hear, and Dr. Luther was such a popular speaker. And early on, before he was excommunicated in 1521, it was okay for us to hear some of the things that he was saying. But then, of course, it was banned. And Mother Superior tried to make sure that we didn't have any of his writings and any of his teachings. And yet, they were so prevalent. There were copies of these everywhere that you turn. Thanks to the printing press, we could get a hold of Luther's works and read some of them. And I only got to read a few of them before 1523. But just the few I read convinced me that life in the convent was not where I needed to be. I needed to be out living my faith, not hiding in a convent. And no matter how many prayers and how many good works I was doing, that was not what was saving me. It was the grace of God alone that saved me. It was my faith in Jesus Christ that saved me. And I wanted to make sure that I could live out that life. And so a group of us from the convent got together and we wrote a letter to Dr. Luther. And we said, we've heard that you're encouraging nuns and monks to leave monasteries and convents, and we want to join them. So Luther made this detailed plan for us. He worked together with some other people in Wittenberg and made this detailed plan for us to escape. And it was the night before Easter. Because things are pretty quiet the night before Easter. Everybody's getting ready for the Easter celebration the next day. So it was a great time to leave. And because all these supplies had come in that day, there was a merchant wagon that was leaving. Now, the herring barrels that were sitting in there weren't too pleasant to scooch around and hide between, but it was okay. Except when we finally rushed about and got in there and we were covered up and we were in hiding, then I know for myself, I got really scared. I mean, how could I not? Do you know what happens to a nun who has left the convent? If she's caught, I could have been tried for heresy and killed. At the very best, it was just considered lawlessness, and anybody who attacked us on the way or anybody who attacked us because they didn't agree with what we believed in were never going to be prosecuted for harming us. So we took our lives in our own hands to escape, but we felt firmly that what Luther was teaching was right. We had read the scriptures. You know, that's one thing you do in the convent. You have lots of time to read, and we were well educated. So we knew the scriptures, and we could see where Luther was getting his teachings. It made a lot of sense to us. So I remember praying this and many other psalms throughout that time. Now, of course, that was in silence, because if you're hiding, you don't pray out loud. But a lot of psalms went through my head that day. And then when we finally arrived at Wittenberg, that next morning was the most glorious day of the resurrection of our Lord that I can remember. We felt so at peace, at least for a short time. We felt like God had delivered us from every evil that we could ever imagine. Now, it was a little short-lived, though, because pretty soon it became apparent that none of our families wanted us back. You know, most of us were too old to marry. Quite a few of us were too old to marry. None of us had dowries to get married. And we had just assumed we'd be in the convent for the rest of our lives. And in that time, women couldn't just go and get a job. So we were dependent on Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon and some of the other people at Wittenberg helping to find us spouses. And that was a pretty scary time. And during that time, I prayed a lot. And remembering God is my refuge and my strength, a very present help in trouble. Finally, after a year, almost a year and a half goes by, I'm still the last one left. Nobody wanted to marry me. Actually, that's not true. A young man that I met, he and I very much hit it off. I was hoping to marry him. Luther, he went back home to get permission to marry me, but apparently his parents weren't in favor because we never quite heard anything back. And Dr. Luther even wrote to Jerome one time just to check and kind of see how things were and if he was coming back, and we didn't hear anything. Not until long after my marriage. So it came to the point where they didn't know what to do with me, and Luther kept trying to come up with people for me to marry. I finally just let it be known that there's only two people I was willing to marry, and Dr. Luther was one of them. So he finally decided to marry me. Now, you would think that, you know, being married and being stable, I wouldn't have to pray so hard about God being my refuge and my strength. But, you know, the only thing worse than being a nun who has left a convent is being married to a monk who left the monastery, and especially the one who was the most well-known, the one who had encouraged others to leave. And so we constantly feared for our lives, especially those early years. And one of the reasons why Dr. Luther didn't want to get married was because he was afraid he was going to die soon. He was afraid somebody was going to take his life. And so there were many times when we prayed together and remember that God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in trouble. But we managed to make it through. We made it through a lot of things together. And when Luther would travel, I'd always worry about him, and he'd write to me. He'd write letters and check on how things were. And after we got married, we had been gifted with this beautiful, huge place to live that had been the monastery, that nobody else was living in any longer. And what was called the Black Cloister had so many rooms and so much space, but hadn't really been taken care of for a couple of years. And Dr. Luther was a brilliant man, but he didn't do well at taking care of things like that. That always was on my shoulders. A, to figure out how to get it done, and to find the workers to do it. And you know what? The only way to pay for it was my suggestion, and that was rent out some of these rooms. There's students always coming to Wittenberg. They always need a place to stay. And so that's how we made our livelihood. And things things were good in many ways. We were equal partners in many ways. He trusted in my opinions. I don't know if you ever heard of those famous table talks that Dr. Luther would have with his students. They'd all eat dinner together and they'd be eating and they'd ask all these hard questions, and he always included me, and he even let me speak at a time when most women weren't invited to. But he knew I had been educated, and he trusted that I had some words of hope to share from the scriptures and from my own theological thoughts. And so I did do that. I was able to do that. And it was a blessing. But there were many other times when we prayed hard that God would be our refuge and our strength. One of those was when we lost our daughter, Magdalena. She was a young girl, almost a woman, when she died, and we were both very heartbroken. And it was hard to hold on to faith during that difficult time, and yet we did. And we were able to trust in God's goodness even through the terrible times when it felt like the earth had moved beneath us, when it felt like mountains had been toppled. We made it through the plague. We made it through a lot of things together. And then, if you haven't heard, Dr. Luther did die a few years ago, and it's been very difficult since. You know, it was great when my husband was alive. I had his income from teaching, of course, at Wittenberg. That helped me manage the funds, and that in some farmland, we were able to keep ourselves fed and to keep all our boarders fed. But now it's very difficult. There's wars going on. There's struggles going on. Some of the people who've been the most supportive of us aren't empowered themselves, or at least don't have their own sense of security any longer. Everything's in turmoil once again. And I don't know what the future holds, but I know that there's probably no more students, maybe a few that would want to stay, but not many. I mean, they came to be able to live with and eat with and spend time with Dr. Luther. They're not interested in that anymore. I don't know what the end of my life will be like, what these days will be like, but I do know something that I hope you also know. I trust that the Lord is my refuge and my strength. And I trust that the faith that Christ gave me is enough. I trust that my salvation is secure, and I trust that yours is as well. May you too go out and pray and believe that God is your refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble.